أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's get started today. Let's start off with a quick check-in. How is everyone doing? How have you been navigating your struggles, or not struggles, or your challenges? And if you have any strategies that you found useful, anything that has resonated with you, anything that's been working, anything that really stood out to you, for example, you could discuss that, inshallah. This is the time, it's open time, and yeah. So with that, we'll just do a short thing, inshallah. We'll just do one story and we'll conclude. Just again, aligning yourself with the truth, and the capital T truth is also defining your boundaries, making sure that these boundaries are aligned in a certain way, with making sure that your personally set boundaries match what your actual boundaries are. Whatever your limitation is physically, mentally, emotionally, right? That whatever you set as your boundaries actually match the real boundaries. And then make sure that whatever you're doing is meaningful, because if it's not meaningful, you're not going to be able to maintain it. And that's the idea of purpose that we talked about in the case of motivation. And then the end vision, again, this is the one we're talking about. So when these things don't happen, when things go wrong, we talked about some examples, and I believe I stopped over here, the Serbs versus the Croatian and the Bosniaks. So I actually made a mistake here. The number of zeros over here is 5, and for some reason when I was like thinking about it, I remembered 6 zeros, and so I put it 1,000,000. It's actually supposed to be 100,000 murders, okay, which is still a lot of murders, because there are 100,000 people. If you imagine in the masjid, when they have Eid prayers, we used to set up for 10,000 people to come over the course of 2 shifts in the past, like maybe like 8-10 years ago or something like that. And obviously the number of Muslims have increased since then. So if you imagine one shift at the Eid prayer, when everyone comes in, for example, where there's 2 shifts, so the biggest shift might have about 10,000 people. So all of those people times 10, that's a lot of people, okay? Just keep that number in mind, 100,000 people. 100,000 people is also just a little bit over half the number of people that have died with COVID-19 in America. So it's about, I think the number, I don't remember the recent number, but it's close to 180,000 right now. And this is 100,000. So you can imagine how many people have died, had died in that genocide over there. Now, the way it started off is that in 1971, the largest group of people in that area in Bosnia was the Muslims. So they were the majority. And then over the next several years, the Serbs and the Croatians started coming in. There was a lot of immigration. A lot of people were coming in to the area, and so the numbers started changing a little bit. And then when they wanted independence, they got their independence. But then the Serbs, they started attacking the Bosniaks, but also the Croatians. And so what happened is they wanted to take over control over the entire area. So they started attacking. The UN sent some peacekeeping troops to make sure that they tried to protect certain cities and so on. But eventually, a lot of them would get overrun by the Serbs, and there was sort of an ethnic cleansing that was going on. Ethnic cleansing can mean like when there's intended to be a mass exodus of a group of people, like an ethnicity, and then from there onwards they can go. I think in this situation here, about I think 80% of the people that were killed were Bosniaks. So these are talking about Muslims that died in this area. So this is the time, 1990 to 1995. In this time period, that's about how many people were killed. And later on, more recently, they had the International Criminal Court. So they had these tribunals and so on, and they were trying to get those people convicted, the ones that were perpetuating these kinds of things and stuff. And I think that I don't remember when, but there was a recent victory when it comes to one of those people that was sort of behind this whole genocide. Now, over here, it's important to note over here that when some people, when they try to impose their version of things, they just want to cleanse, the society, for example, of a certain group of people just because they have a hatred against them or they think that they're better than them, that they think that this can continue happening, right? But in reality, when people see victims, when they see people that are being harmed, a lot of people around the world are going to start recognizing that, and then they're going to come in and start, try to help these victims and so on, right? So, for example, and this is going to happen because a lot of people that are affected by this in the public and in the leadership of various countries are going to feel a strong urge, in themselves to go ahead and try to help these people. They're going to feel bad of what's happening, right? So it is a very small cult-like thing to think that, or like there's a cult mentality, essentially, you could say, where people sort of want to kill everyone else that don't belong to their thing. This is what happened in the Nazi Germany, for example, right? And the movement that was spreading out from there, it was an idea of ethnic cleansing and stuff to make sure that there's an Aryan race only that is propagated onwards, and that's the best, race, and like that's what needs to be preserved and so on. That was the idea. If you remember, recently in New Zealand when the shootings happened and there was a lot of killing, so recently there was the person who was in court, and the prosecutors were going against it and stuff, right? So they were talking about how he had actually intended to have he had a third masjid that he had targeted and he was going to go against and so on, right? But his idea was that he wanted to cleanse the area of these immigrants that had come in and these foreigners that had come in and they were trying to take over, or they were trying to mess things up pretty much for the locals or the people that were originally supposed to be in that area. And so this was the idea that was seen as well over here, and it's something that was seen in the case of the Nazis, and it seems to be also the case of what's happening in Israel, or Palestine, right, and how Israel is trying to take over. And this is the idea over here. It's the idea that we're going to try to put down everyone under us, just because we think that these are people or they need to be lower than us because we have better blood than them or whatever, right? So whenever a person tries to make themselves look better because of what they've been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, over another group of people, that's where situations go wrong, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give people superiority over another just by the way of how they're created and stuff, which they didn't have control of themselves about, right? So people that were that were born, for example, Palestinian, or that were born, for example, Indian, or that were born, I don't know, wherever they were born and stuff, for example, or they have a certain skin color and stuff, right? Allah is not going to account you for those things. You're not superior or worse because of those things that you didn't have control over. You are superior or worse because of the things that you choose to do, right? The ayah says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He created, the nations and tribes. He has made us into nations and tribes, right? And then He says that the superiority, actually He also mentions min dhakar and untha, that He created us from a male and a female, right? And He has made us into nations and tribes, or qabail, or I guess small clans, right? He has made us into that. But then He says inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that the most honorable among you in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has the most taqwa. So the point over here is that things that you have control over, you have a choice to do, those are the things that determine if you may get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. And if that's not the case, then if it's something that you don't have control over, you're not going to be better than another person. Doesn't matter what you think and stuff, right? You're not going to be better just because of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you to start off with. What makes you better is what you do with what you have, what you've been given, right? Those are your decisions, and that's where That's what determines if you're going to be higher or lower. Your lineage is not going to speed you up in terms of your good deeds, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, right? Just because you have a good lineage doesn't mean that you're going to be saved, and that's it. Even the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, if they weren't good, they're not going to be saved by the fact that they have a lineage connected to the Prophet ﷺ. So what saves them, what saves people, is the actions and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy that comes when people do things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the important part over here. When people don't understand that, then things go wrong, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it so that one group of people overtakes another group of people, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send down punishment by way of natural disasters or whatever that might be. So this is what happened over here. They were trying to make it seem like they're better, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent other people to sort of push them down, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also accounts these people by way of other things, whatever those other things might be, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's whatever the situation might be, right? So keep these things in mind, inshallah. If in America, for example, if we take lessons from here, if in the world if there's an area in the world that has a lot of natural disasters and a lot of problems that are happening and stuff, right, just keep in mind that there might be some things that are not happening the way they should be happening, and even the people themselves may not be fixing things for themselves, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna account for that to help the oppressed people by sending disasters and so on to wake the people up, because these things that you do, the haram stuff that you do and so on, has consequences when it comes to, especially when it comes to zulm, right? When it comes to oppression. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to compensate for that if people don't try to fix things up in themselves. So wherever you see these things happening a lot, just remind yourself that this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is accounting those people, because we're not doing our part. We're not the ones. By we, I mean as human beings. I don't mean like individuals and stuff, right? So as human beings, we're not doing enough to stop oppression and zulm and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to either replace us by bringing other people over us, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send natural disasters and things like that to account for that. So keep that in mind. This is a lesson that they learned over here, and that's something that we can take out of this story over here, that when their small t truth did not align with the capital T truth, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accounted for that, and now now the people are talking about how it was actually a genocide, and the world recognizes it and so on. These people are going through the International Criminal Court and stuff. They're having their war crimes and the tribunals and so on, right? So these are some things to keep in mind, inshallah. Okay, I don't think I'm going to go into this. We'll go into this, inshallah, next time. But I want you to just kind of explore these right here. I know these are like long websites that you have to type in. If you would like, I can send you the links directly. But in the meantime, if you can just type them in, that's fine too. And yeah, so inshallah, you can just look through them. There's obviously a lot more to this than I posted. I tried to go across the board in terms of like where I got these things from, in terms of what I cited, right? There's a lot of content out there, but I wanted to make sure that it's not just one-sided, as much as possible. So I tried to, in this case, there's a Huffington Post, there's AP, and then there's a Business Insider, which actually quotes from the Washington Post and so on, right? So some things, you just get from different places and stuff. But in one of the things, I think I had a History Channel one too. I don't remember. Actually, they actually quote History Channel in the Business Insider one. They have another link inside of it. Let me show you if I can. Okay, so they have Washington Post here, and then they have the History Channel over here. So you'll see that both of them are there, right? Yeah, so you'll see that they have stuff cited in there. Anyways, this stuff, inshallah, I want you to explore a little bit, because this is very important in the context of Black Lives Movement, as like a movement, not the organization, but the movement itself, right? The idea of justice and so on, fairness, to make sure that everyone gets what they need, as opposed to whatever we think that they should get just because we think so, right? Our perceptions do not necessarily equate to the reality of how things are. So that's what I want to go over here, and we're going to analyze a little bit of what happens when our small t truths misalign with capital T truths. You guys are already seeing this around the world. You've seen this since the civil rights started, civil rights movement started a while back, but you've also been seeing this in the very beginning, when the people who were writing the Constitution, when they were writing them, what was going on in their context in terms of slavery and what they had in terms of their perceptions of slavery. For example, um, like some of the people that wrote the Constitution and some of the initial presidents had very racist views about how things are, right? And then as you go forward, you're going to see more of this happening. And you'll see, for example, statements where people are thinking that slaves are by the imagination and by their like brain power and things like that are inferior to whites. That these people are a little bit, they're more like they're, for lack of a better word, they were considering them that they were intellectually deficient, so they were dumb essentially compared to white people, right? And they were saying that this is how it just is. They're just born like that. That's just how it is, right? And so they cannot be compatible living in the societies of white people, although we consider them equally as human beings, but we can't treat them the same way, or they have some differences that we need to account for. These people, brain-wise, they would measure their noses, for example. They would figure out like the size of their head and stuff, right? They actually have pictures of like this whole stuff happening because they thought that this is how like they can like figure out the differences between people just by how the body bone structure is. And you'll see the same thing happening when it comes to the Nazis, when they would do the same things, right? They would do experiments and stuff. They would measure these things and stuff, try to figure out, this is called scientific racism, right? And the idea is just to justify scientifically the idea that different races are actually inferior to each other, for example, right? So that stuff, inshallah, we'll see how that impacted the dynamics of uh, the United States, but also how it impacts us today, but also how it impacted how things are around the world, right? When it comes to slavery, when it comes to how people universally treated black people, because if you remember back in the day when the colonial powers were going around and taking over land and stuff, right? There was the slave trade also very rampant all over the world, and how it impacted people's perceptions of black people. In fact, um, in the early 1900s, and actually go back all the way like hundreds of years back, you'll find people used to put like arsenic and other kinds of things in their like powder and their makeup and things like that to make their skins appear whiter than they were. So they were trying to excessively make themselves look whiter because it seemed to be like some like that sign of like loyalty and things like that. Because if you were outside in the sun and your skin got black and stuff, right, it was a sign that you're lower class and things like that, right? Whereas if you were upper class and stuff, you're away from the sun and so on. So they were trying to do these, and then a lot of this stuff was also poisonous, and so it would also impact the people and like kill them sometimes and stuff like that because of that poisoning and so on. So just keep these things in mind that like it helped, right? So like not helped, it was harming people. These are the consequences we're going to discuss, inshallah. But just to give you like a head start to kind of discuss or to explore what was going on, inshallah. And then inshallah we're going to also see how the third world country aspect, how they're a lot of times they remain third world countries for a very long time, if not forever, and how exploitation because of something similar to this, right, comes in the context of that. And sometimes people have this idea of racial superiority and like things like that, and these like false notions that have no actual substantial value, but these are just things that people try to use as like fronts to exploit people or hurt people and so on. How that impacts a lot of people. For example, if you even look in like Saudi, for example, you're going to see that a lot of people coming in from like third world countries are going to come in over there. They're cleaning the haramain, they're cleaning all this stuff, but a lot of times they're living in the worst situation, and the people, the locals over there, are treating them in a really negative way, in a really bad way. They treat them as they're like slaves or they're trash or whatever and stuff. They don't really take care of them and so on, and they don't get the same rights as other people. So how that plays into it, and how that continues to impact the global economy and so on, and how that impacts people from like a societal perspective, where they have animosities towards other people. Sometimes they might even feel bad about their own people. They might have animosity against their own people because of how things are like propagated. So whatever the social norms are, that okay, white is better than black, for example, and how that impacts even the people themselves, or this idea that all darker people are like illiterate or they're not as smart as others and stuff, or maybe they're more prone to criminal activities and others and stuff, right? How that actually impacts the people within the same races themselves, how they treat each other because of that. And when they feel like they have gained the money and stuff and some popularity and fame, how they treat even the people among the, their own races and so on, because they feel like these other people, like these other members of our own races are inferior to us, and they're more prone to all these bad activities and stuff, and how that perception impacts a lot of people to exploit each other and so on. So just some things that inshallah we're going to talk about, but I want you to explore this a lot more. Think about what your justifications are. I might ask you guys to explain where things went wrong, where step 0 and 1 went wrong here, and where they went wrong here, and what are the solutions for them. Because we also need to know, we need to recognize the problems, but we also need to know how to fix them. So we'll have some more discussion over here, inshallah. I'm hoping it's going to be more interactive, inshallah, if you guys are comfortable with that. So with that, today our session, or the portion where we discuss everyone's reflections or comments and things that they're going through, it was a little bit longer because that was more hands-on stuff, and that's the idea with it. So that was good, inshallah. So let's continue to see if we can continuously engage, see, explore, brainstorm, do whatever you need to do, inshallah, to see how you can benefit from the stuff we're actually presenting, inshallah. So because I don't want this to be just something that you take, listen to, walk away, and then it's done. I want this to transform into actions and like help people in terms of transforming their lives, bi'idhnillah, towards what's best and what makes them happy and content, bi'idhnillah, and doing the things that are good for them, inshallah. So with that, the homework is just going back, looking through these and exploring them, but also seeing how you can reframe a lot of the struggles that you're going through in your life. Reframe them as, number one, as challenges, but also recognize what your boundaries are. Make sure you know how to set your boundaries. If you're being too difficult on yourself, too hard on yourself, and it's causing a lot of stress, then ease up, because that's not the idea. Your idea is sustainability, and you want to make sure you can have an impact. And when that doesn't happen, you become overwhelmed and stressed, and that means your perceived boundaries are your lowercase t truths, and they're not aligning with the actual boundaries that you have that are physical, like whether it comes to your physical boundaries, whether it's your emotional boundaries or mental boundaries, or whatever it might be. So when they don't align, you get stressed out. So make sure that you align your perceived boundaries with your actual boundaries, and make sure that you can constantly do that when you're sort of falling out of track, when you feel that you're getting overwhelmed and stressed out. So with that, inshallah, I'll go ahead and conclude.